Good evening. To millions, it is the very symbol of Sydney, and tonight marks 90 years since our iconic Harbour Bridge opened. This is a live look at the bridge tonight. In 2 hours, a spectacular light show will beam across the Australian landmark. It is undoubtedly one of the country's greatest achievements, and today the bridge was honoured for uniting a divided city.
It was almost as if the sky was painted in tribute to the great grey bridge that, in all weather, has connected a city and its people for 90 years. Descendants of bridge champion engineer John Bradfield brought the cake.
Happy 90th birthday, Sydney Harbour Bridge! Hooray!
This morning, a flash of red rattling over. The same carriage that made the first journey opening day, 1932. On board, Bradfield's grandson, Philip.
I believe this is the same seat that my father sat in 90 years ago at this time.
Elizabeth was 7 years old that day, the generation who watched it rise.
The two half arches growing together from shore to shore were watched with growing enthusiasm.
All the children in Sydney hoped they'd both not come together, and we were thoroughly disappointed when they met exactly.
Thanks to people like her dad, a crane operator who moved the steel crafting those arches.
And my father would come down on a rope and have lunch with us.
Vintage Motors also bringing the spirit of that first day. 8 years to build, but Bradfield's vision for more than 30.
He stood around about where I am standing right now with my grandmother and turned to my grandmother and said, I'm going to put a bridge over that.
The official opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, made in Australia by Australians for Australia.
When they built the Sydney Harbour Bridge, they figured it would last for at least a century. Well, turns out it was built so well that 90 years on, it's barely reached middle age. And they think that as it is, it'll give Sydney 100 years more at least of service. So plenty more birthdays to come for the bridge that's always been more than just a bridge. Vital work in the Depression, a podium for protest. Francis de Groot slashing the opening ribbon, not the last.
What do we want? An apology! When do we want it? Now!
Carrying a nation's ambitions, a city's celebrations. Centre stage for the world to see and know us.
Whether it's 6 million rivets, whether it's 160,000 vehicles a day, whether it's a train every 3 minutes in either direction.
A fixed point for a city on the move, but significant change is coming. A third flagpole for the Aboriginal flag. 90 years after Barbara's mum and grandmother joined the million who walked across that first day, she did too, much higher up.
I've done it!
Milestones all round. There is so much to the story of Sydney's bridge, and you can see more of that history in our 7 News special tonight, right after the news. Angela, today has been a chance to celebrate all those who imagined this into reality, the army of workers without whom it would not have happened, and all of those who today keep it running, maintained and continuously painted for the future. Angela.
Indeed. Thank you, Paul. Now let's go to Serena Andaloro at Campbell's Cove. Serena, celebrations will continue there tonight.
They sure will, Ange. There's a concert here with musical tributes from ARIA award-winning artists, and later the bridge and its pylons will light up, much like the faces of the thousands of people who turned out to celebrate its birthday. From the harbour to the city streets, the love for Sydney's centrepiece, Bridged Time.
Happy birthday to you.
Across Sydney, it was 1932, the news spreading fast.
Extra, extra! Read all about it.
Stacks of festivities, revellers lining up to cross over.
Archie for boys and Bridget for girls.
And no one was spoiling the fun.
I think you ought to move along.
What a rat bag.
About our bridge, there was a word on everyone's lips.
It's Sydney's icon.
It's an icon.
It's the icon. It's
iconic.
It's iconic. Everyone knows that. It's the same age as my father. So that's why I've come down.
Also of the same vintage, 90-year-old Christine.
But it's the same year.
Same year.
Same year.
What does the bridge mean to people?
I suppose it's a link
more than anything else.
Connecting generations of Sydney-siders.
Very old.
It is very old.
The Groot opened it with his sword.
His great-great-grandfather was renegade Francis de Groot's lawyer after this moment, although there was little leniency for stealing the show.
We have a bit of a connection because of that.
It's still a modern marvel.
I think the Harbour Bridge is a wonderful symbol of some engineering prowess.
They don't make it how they used to. I'm an engineer by trade, and just getting approval will be a headache.
Even sacred for some.
I suppose it's up there with Ayers Rock, I suppose. That and the MCG, I suppose.
To the world, the bridge is Sydney's most recognisable symbol, the gateway to our harbour city, humbling even the tallest of vessels. Taller than the tall ships?
Taller than the tall ships. I just can't get enough of it. It means that it's my town. It's my hometown. And it's gorgeous.
Resolute as always, the coat hanger, where Sydney hangs its hope. Serena Andaloro, 7 News.
And coming up tonight, rare footage and forgotten heroes, what you didn't know about the Harbour Bridge, right after the news.
I am Philip Bradfield. I am a grandson of Dr. John Job Crew Bradfield, who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge and is well regarded as the greatest visionary for New South Wales and probably Australia, in spite of the fact that it is so many years ago that in actual fact his first dreams were made of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and those dreams of course turned into reality. I've got to tell you, sadly enough, I never knew my grandfather because I was born 4 years after he passed on, and I've been asked to speak a bit about him today. So anything I say will either be hearsay or maybe even family folklore. But one story that I'm sure you'll appreciate, not 90 years ago, but before the turn of the century. And of course I'm not talking about when we went from 1900s into 2000s, I'm talking about the previous turn of the century. He stood around about where I am standing right now with my grandmother and turned to my grandmother and said, I'm going to put a bridge over that. Now, at the time he was in his mid-30s, appreciating the fact that when in actual fact the bridge opened in 1932, he was in his mid-60s. His dream was to put the bridge over there. But if we leave it at the bridge, then we don't really know my grandfather. When he finished the bridge here, he went up to Brisbane and had designed the Story Bridge in Brisbane. So we don't have one Bradfield Highway in Australia, we have two. Mind you, I think one's the shortest highway and the next one's the second shortest highway. But that's the way it goes. But he was a man who got on just as well with his peers and all of the people who worked for him. I will read you something now that was written about him after his death by a very well-known lady who, in January of this year, Dr. Lenore Coulthart was awarded the OAM for Australia only this year. And she said of him, he was never satisfied that his work was done. Bradfield was consultant designer on Brisbane's Story Bridge after his retirement, and at 74 was actively promoting an irrigation system for the arid inland of Western Queensland. This involved a project then rejected as impossibly expensive. I'm glad they didn't reject his proposal on Sydney Harbour Bridge for the same reason. And let me tell you, he had many fights and arguments in order to be able to achieve the finance. At that point of time, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic at the moment. But we've got to realise, apart from the Spanish flu pandemic in Australia and the world at the time of the 1920s, when he was still working on the bridge, it was part of his position. Apart from that, there was of course something called the World War I, which had a rather dramatic effect on the whole world as well. And as been said already, of course, as the bridge was being built, we had a Great Depression. We are all aware at the moment of what the floods and all that sort of thing and the drama it's causing, hopefully not to too many of us here present, but throughout Australia. And I'll go on. This involved a project then rejected as impossibly expensive, the damming of the Burdekin River in North Queensland. The Queensland government completed the first stage of the Burdekin Dam in August 1988, but nothing further has been done on my grandfather's irrigation plan to take the flooding waters out of Queensland, down the western side of the Great Dividing Range and even across the middle of Sydney, in spite of the fact that during the election campaign we're not having yet, I've already heard somebody speaking about this plan and why can't it go ahead, and I'm quite sure I get the support of most of the people in the west of Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning everyone, Howard Collins, Chief Operations Officer for Transport for New South Wales. Well, I feel very humble to stand next to some DNA of John Bradfield. I think throughout the world, us transport folk have always paid massive respect to this man. And obviously the two women behind him as well, his personal confidential secretary and a lady in work for Dortmund Long as well. Those two women actually were critical to the building of this bridge, and I pay my respects to both Buchanan and Butler who were part of that. But what I want to say first is Bradfield not only had a plan about this bridge, but he had a plan about electrifying the Sydney rail network. Electricity is big today, but 100 years ago it was really being talked about as the new revolution. And he went around the world, he saw Boston, he went to New York, he went to Moscow and brought back this plan. And this bridge is a symbol of it. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to all the men and women who work on this bridge today. Without them, my riggers, my painters, the security guys who are in that tower over there, I just want to say thank you, because every day they do something amazing, which is getting all those trains, all those cars over the bridge and back again and make sure it's safe. Thank you to the Sydney Trains as well, who have started modernising that bridge and making sure it's going to last another 200 years for our railway folk. What's exciting about this weekend, and particularly today, is you've got a lot to enjoy. It's not only the birthday of this beautiful bridge, but also the first train over that bridge was and is running today, would you believe, 90 years later, thanks to a bunch of volunteers and a crazy ex-chief executive who decided to let this electric train back out on the network after 13 years of being incarcerated somewhere in a shed in Everleigh. But the smiles on people's faces as we went over the bridge, I think, was fantastic. The vintage buses, you've got to have a ride on those as well, because they are doing a great job for it, as well as celebrating Aboriginal culture and as well as recognising that very soon, and I'm going to do all we can to get that third flag on the bridge as it should be, celebrating and making sure people understand our First Nations people, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island culture. Some fun facts, you must have some fun facts, you know, whether it's 6 million rivets, whether it's 160,000 vehicles a day, whether it's a train every 3 minutes in either direction, whether you realise that this bridge grows about 14 centimetres in height on a hot day and shrinks down when it's a cool day as well. When you realise, yes, we do continually paint it, and we're painting it, probably not today because it's raining, but for the rest of the week we'll be out there with our paintbrushes making sure it's kept in good order. I'm very proud of this bridge, and I just want to say thank you on everybody's behalf for 90 years of service, and with the team I've got behind me we'll see another 90 years as well. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bradfield, could we ask you a couple of questions if that's all right, sir? You're very kind.
I hope I can answer them.
I wasn't lucky enough to join you on the train this morning, but can I just ask you what that was like going over there and sitting in that seat?
From a personal point of view, it was very moving for me, because my father, not my grandfather, my father sat in that seat, I understand, on the first carriage to come across. Sadly enough, I was only 4 when he was killed. So for me it was very moving.
And why was it so special for you to be here today from not just that very personal perspective, but from I guess knowing the enormity of what your grandfather achieved? Was that pretty spectacular to look out there and think this was my grandfather's dream?
Makes me an extremely proud grandson, indeed. Yes, I in actual fact live very close to where his family home was, and I attend the same church that he attended. So I have a lot of these sort of opportunities to go out and talk about my grandfather. And yes, I'm a very proud person to be able to do that.
Do you live in Sydney or are you in Brisbane?
No, Sydney. His family home was in Park Avenue at Gordon.
Do you ever get the train just as a private citizen and pop on a train and go over the bridge? And do you think all the people sitting around you, they're probably thinking, oh, this is a lovely, what a great view going over the bridge, and you're sitting there having a little chuckle?
I very much appreciate the pylons particularly, and yes I do, and I'd have to say that on occasions I've even, when people look as though they've got some sort of an interest, I even annoy them.
You pipe up.
I pipe up. And generally they're extremely appreciative of knowing that, but yeah, look, as I said, such a visionary, and it's wonderful to know now that in actual fact he has been recognised with the City of Sydney.